Speech. Training the Tongue. Lecture 19. The link between the quality of language and the caliber of behavior is widely recognized. Our words have an undeniable effect on the way we think and act. Skillful use of language involves not simply refraining from using false speech, but also giving mindful attention to what we say and how we say it. Thoughtful, wholesome language can be the bearer of compassion. The book of Proverbs reminds us, thoughtless words cut like a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Wholesome speech and skillful communication. The Buddha devoted much of his teaching to the practice of skillful communication and offered very cogent ideas to guide our efforts to use language in the most beneficial ways possible. Buddha taught that skillful speech should be truthful, compassionate, gentle, and edifying. When our words have all these qualities, we can know that our use of language is wholesome and conducive to the end of suffering. However, attaining these qualities is no mean feat. Speaking the truth is the basic condition for skillful speech, yet it is a fundamental qualification that many of us find difficult to observe. Most of us are quite capable of telling flat-out falsehoods if we think we can benefit by them, and some of us will tell them frequently if we thought we wouldn't be caught. Even when we don't go so far as to tell bold-faced lies, we often embellish and stretch the truth to suit our own desires. These forms of false speech can become so habitual that we even fail to recognize when they leave our lips. The Buddha's criteria for wholesome speech. Because we are often mindless about the truthfulness of our utterances, it behooves us to pay careful attention to the content of what we say. Buddha prescribed a simple procedure for ensuring we are speaking the truthful speech. As a matter of practice, we can carefully monitor our words with mindfulness by paying attention to make sure our words comport with what we know to be true, and by refraining from pretending we know when in fact we don't. We can use that same practice to help us better understand our propensity to speak falsely. After you observe yourself deviating from or exaggerating the truth, use your sitting practice to examine the antecedent causes underlying what you've said. If we look diligently, we'll usually find the illusion of the self lurking in there somewhere. The fear that often motivates a falsehood can arise from the belief that we need to appear a certain way, which is of course a basic expression of the ego. Likewise, embellishing the truth can serve to make sure ourselves seem more interesting and perhaps more important than we really are. As we are investigating the causes for any instances of false speech, reflect as well on the consequences. Study the effect of failing to be truthful. Take special note of the ways that dishonesty causes you to suffer. Whereas truthfulness is a necessary condition for skillful speech, it is not by any means the sole criterion. Just because something is truthful does not mean we should say it. Truth must be spoken compassionately. The manner in which truth is communicated is of great importance in the practice of skillful speech. The provision of truthfulness, the Buddha added that wholesome speech should be delivered in a timely manner, in a way that benefits the listener. For instance, we sometimes find ourselves in conversation when we have a piece of truthful information to offer, but we recognize that this particular occasion is not the best time or place to share it. It might be something that is better imparted privately with the person it concerns, or perhaps it's a point that needs to be said when the individual it concerns is in the proper frame of mind to receive it. In any event, it's best to maintain silence until conditions are better suited for compassionate communication. The Buddha made a point of saying, however, that compassionate communication does not depend on whether or not one's words will be welcomed by the hearer. If what one had to say were true, beneficial, and timely, the Buddha recommended that one speak whether or not others would find those words agreeable. In short, being compassionate does not mean saying what others want to hear. It means speaking the truth in a kind of way that can help bring relief from suffering. Sometimes the recipient may find even a compassionately delivered truth unwelcome, yet for the sake of being compassionate, one must find a way to say it. When hard, truthful messages have to be given, it is crucial to be clear about intent. Always ask yourself, why am I saying this? What am I really trying to accomplish with these words? It's easy for us to fool ourselves when it comes to conversing with others, just as it's easy to fool ourselves in other internal dialogue. There are those who believe that truth must be spoken regardless of consequences. These are those who think of themselves as brutally honest, and they consider their candor of noble quality. However, those who pride themselves on their brutal honesty seem to get more pleasure from being brutal than from being honest. That was nice. I will read it again. There are those who believe that the truth must be spoken regardless of consequences. These are those who think of themselves as brutally honest, and they consider their candor a noble quality. Often, however, those who pride themselves on their brutal honesty seem to get more pleasure from being brutal than from being honest. Yeah, I think I do that. In the past, I always had this pride of being brutally honest, but in fact, now that I read the sentence, it's kind of enlightened me. What I really had the pleasure from brutally honest, by saying I'm brutally honest, is that brutality what gave me pleasure. Because deep down I think I sometimes enjoy hurting people. I had to admit that. Especially, we all have this. I don't think I'm the only one in the world who sometimes enjoy hurting other people. I'm not saying that physically. It's even horrible to say that. But words sometimes are really so painful. To hear and to say, or to be said to other people. it actually hurts, but sometimes we don't really care about how other people feel or will feel. But yeah, sometimes I had the pride that I am brutally honest, and then I say some words which sound really brutal and harsh, and then it kind of slapped the other party out of nowhere. They feel shock of hearing that brutal honesty, quote and unquote, and then they feel hurt by it, and then I just like reply by saying that I'm being brutally honest, but in fact at that moment I just enjoy, I get pleasure hurting the other party without being compassionate. But sometimes we do it because we have pain, because maybe they hurt us in some way, and then we just want to hurt them back, just to retaliate, just to get revenge. It's really all sourcing from ego anyway. I mean, eventually all of this stuff is all sourcing from ego. Yeah. Compassionate speech. Efforts to make hurtful assertions under the veil of truth are nothing more than what the Buddha called malicious speech. A malicious statement may be either true or false, but its objective is to harm. Malicious speech has been around since shortly after the first human being uttered the first word. Lately, however, it seems to have gained a new dimension with the explosion of electronic media, which has created a distance between writers and the effects of their words. The personal distance, the opportunity for immediate response, and the frequent anonymity afforded by the internet is a virtual invitation for many of us to disregard the principles of propriety. And vent our spleens shamelessly. Gentle speech. The Buddha's third criterion for wholesome speech is gentleness. Our words should be truthful, beneficial, and timely, and they should be spoken in a mild manner. This criterization thus excludes malicious speech and what the Buddha called harsh speech. Malicious speech has the clear intent of hurting others, but harsh speech may be hurtful without any real intent to be so. Harsh speech is usually thoughtless, although it can also be malicious at times. Harsh speech includes profanity, sarcasm, and shouting. Essentially, harsh speech is the use of language that shows little or no regard for the feelings of others. Avoiding harsh speech is the negative aspect of speaking gently. The positive side involves choosing kind words and speaking them clearly and soothingly. Gentle speech means offering sincere compliments to others, helping to facilitate constructive discussion, and listening mindfully to what others have to say. Gentleness of speech can also mean keeping silent so that others may be heard, or simply to allow high emotions to settle. The equanimity that we cultivate as we continue mindfulness practice helps us speak our words with mildness. Edifying speech. Finally, the Buddha urges that our speech serve a constructive purpose. This is what is meant when we say that our words should edify. Unless our words work to provide us some real benefit, it's best to keep quiet. When a wise word can help, though when it can ease suffering or open us to new insight, speaking is a blessing. Like gentleness, edifying speech has both a negative and a positive aspect. The negative side is those expressions of language that are best to avoid. Buddha called these forms of speech idle chatter, the verbal equivalent of stuff, or unnecessary material possessions, is generic inessential language whose basic purpose is to fill airspace. Wow. That's really beautifully put it here. Yeah, also this one. Unless our words work to provide us some real benefit, it's best to keep quiet. When a wise word can help, though, when it can ease suffering or open us to new insight, speaking is a blessing. Like gentleness, edifying speech has both a negative and a positive aspect. The negative side is those expressions of language that are best to avoid. The Buddha called these forms of speech idle chatter, the verbal equivalent of stuff, or unnecessary material possessions. Is generic inessential language whose basic purpose is to fill airspace. Idle chatter often arises because silence seems so threatening. It's interesting that the English language has a great many words to describe idle chatter. They include babble, blab, drivel, gab, jabber, jibe, prattle, yakking, twaddle, and running off at the mouth. Idle chatter often arises because silence seems so threatening. Wow. The most invidious form of idle chatter goes by the name of gossip, which is so pervasive that it's hard to imagine life without it. It seems almost natural to want to know about the intimate details of the lives of others. The phenomenon of gossip is complex, serving many functions and deriving from many causes. Certainly, part of the reason gossip is so appealing is that it lets individuals monitor social situations so they can relate to others accordingly. Sharing gossip with friends may even be a form of bonding, at least in a few ways. Then gossip may serve some important purposes. The perilous aspect of gossip, however, is the way it easily becomes vicious. Even when information is true, gossip has a way of shaping the truth in a negative fashion. Deep within most of us is the hidden and sometimes not so hidden capacity to enjoy hearing about the misfortunes of others, even those to whom we are close. What's really sad, of course, is the way that malicious gossip can cause suffering. There is now growing evidence to indicate that many teen suicides in this country have been prompted, at least in part, by vicious rumors spread by word of mouth and especially through social networks on the internet. Perhaps less apparent is the effect of gossiping on those who perpetuate it. While it may be true that gossip serves some useful social functions, we ought to give thought to whether or not those functions might be better served by other, more benign means. Even when it is not malicious, idle chatter in its various forms can be a colossal waste of precious time. Meditation and wholesome speech. Wholesome speech, as taught in the Buddhist mindfulness tradition, is truthful, compassionate, gentle, and edifying. We can remember these qualities if we think of them as simple questions to ask ourselves before we speak. Why do I want to say this? Why do I want to say this? Is what I want to say completely true? Will what I say result in benefit or harm? Is now the right time to say it? How may I say it to be most beneficial and effective? Practicing loving kindness meditation predisposes us to being more compassionate, cultivating a frame of mind in which matters such as the effect of our words are already a prime concern. Long before we engage in conversation, our hearts are attuned to speaking compassionately. Sitting and walking meditation also play important roles in shaping skillful speech. These practices, of course, sharpen our skills of observation and moment-to-moment awareness. Using these techniques allows us to give close attention not only to what is said, but also to how we respond emotionally, mentally, and physically. A refined ability to monitor our own internal state makes it possible for us to avoid knee-jerk reactions and provides us with enough mental space to be more deliberate about how we respond. Getting to this level of self-awareness and discipline, of course, requires a great deal of practice, but learning to create a spacious mind is a powerful ally in learning to use speech skillfully. It is also an especially valuable technique in working with others, with anger. Important terms: harsh speech, speech that may be hurtful without any real intent to be so. The use of language that shows little or no regard for the feelings of others. It is usually thoughtless and includes profanity, sarcasm, and shouting. Idle chatter, generic, inessential language whose basic purpose is to fill airspace. It is the verbal equivalent of unnecessary material possessions. Malicious speech, the Buddhist term for the practice of making hurtful assertions under the veil of truth. A malicious statement may be either true or false, but its objective is to harm. Questions to consider. What are your usual first reactions to an abusive comment? Anger, fear, or shock? What do you usually do, say, and think? Are your responses as skillful as you would like? If not, how can more skillful means be cultivated? What qualities of wholesome speech, truthful, compassionate, gentle, and edifying, are most difficult for you to observe, and why? What qualities of wholesome speech, truthful, compassionate, gentle, and edifying, are most difficult for you to observe, and why?